All right. So this meeting is now being recorded. So I started that all. And I still haven't got things up today. Well, is that better? I don't know. It seems a little better. But getting this darn camera to be exactly right, it seems to be an impossible task. And is that good now? Well, let's leave it at that and say this is it. So you can see my comfortable living quarters here in Vrindavan. It is a sweltering 42 degrees. And it's been like this for several days now, a couple of weeks. So we're having our heat wave here. And I hear they're having heat waves all around the world. So, but even still, I hear that there are people who are denying that global warming is actually taking place. It's a very interesting phenomenon. You can bring a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. At any rate, people just don't like it when we take away their freedom. Their freedom to do what? Ah, well, we live in strange times, my friend. So we don't come here to discuss them. We come here to forget them. So if I may, I will begin. Actually, what I do, I'll share the screen so you don't have to look at me. I will share the screen. So I have two screens. I've got well, we'll switch around according to what's, whoops, we'll switch around to what, excuse me, you share. This one. Right. So we're doing number 15. Okay. So what is going on here, my friends? So we're doing, I'm taking up what I've decided to do now because of, I was doing the Priti Sandarbha before and I uploaded them to YouTube. So they're still there if you want to go and look at them. They're not particularly edifying, but at any rate, I did some work on those first two anuccheds, and for better or for worse, probably for worse, but for better or for worse, I shared it with the world in this madness. They were used to say, if a tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, did it really fall? So it's the same thing nowadays. If it's not on YouTube, did it really happen? Did you really have that realization? Did you really read Priti Sandarbha? Well, it's hard to tell, believe me. The memory is really a sieve. So we're in so if you want to catch up, you can go back on my blog also, going back there, Priti Sandarbha. Yeah, go back and read the previous anucheds, catch up. I also have to catch up. Right now, I am working on 100, somewhere past number 100, 110. So in my splotchy way of working, but we are really up to, I sent Babaji up to 92. So that means I'm up to 92. So there's a lot of work left to be done and I have to concentrate. So my giving a class is a part of my scheme to take my mind and to wean it from all distractions other than Priti Sandarbha. Because it's quite a big deal. My memory is, truthfully, it's quite something that you go through the book and then 5 minutes later you've forgotten what already what is done. Partly it's because I'm looking at the trees instead of at the forest, right? So one has to look at the trees and then one has to look at the trees again, and then one notices that one's in a forest and one can make some assumptions about the forest. So here we are, and we're talking about mukti. So, so Jiva Goswami is getting mukti out of the way. There are muktis and there are Vaishnava muktis, and these are famous, Salokya, Sarshti, Sam. So the verse is very, very well known because it says Salokya, Sarshti, Sāmīpya, Sarupyam ekatvam ityuta, Diyamanam nagrashnanti vinamatsevanang jana. So a devotee doesn't accept these 5 kinds of mukti unless they get seva. So of course the 4 kinds of mukti, and then there's ekatvam or sayujam, which the devotee never accepts because there's no scope for service in sayujya. So now what's going to happen here is we're going to get a little bit of that, because sayujya, in a sense, all of these muktis are present in prema, in priti. They're all subsumed, of course, the idea that sāmīpya, a devotee wants to be near Krishna so he can serve him, and so he can relish his beauty and his other good qualities. Sarshti, Sārupya, all these things, but the Sārupya, as the example was given earlier in the Priti Sandarbha, that a prince, there's only one prince in the kingdom, so but he wants to have friends and companions, even servants, who are going to be of similar qualities to him. Right? In the rich households, the servants are also dressed finely so that they reflect the majesty of the household. So it's like that with Krishna also. So he bestows Sārupya, because Sārupya means to have a body like Krishna. And actually one gets a body like Krishna's at the time of initiation, stated in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Diksha kale Krishna tare kore attvasham. Shri kale tare deho tare de chidananda deho. Chidananda dehe se Krishna ke se hoy. Now you serve Krishna in a chidananda deha. So in order to make you eligible, you have to have a spiritual body. So you're given a spiritual body in order to serve Krishna. You're given a spiritual mind in order to think of Krishna. But if you keep lapsing back into your old habits, well, that's a problem for sure. You're not able to recognize the glory of the gift that you've been given. And you still think that this body is something material. And that's why we have deha sadhana, in order to train up the body. One has to appreciate the divine nature of the body, of the human body. So the sadhaka is also seeking sāmīpya, sālokya, sārupya. Sarshti, well, it's the same story as with the Sārupya. To be equal to be Krishna's associate, you have to be like him. Devo bhutva devam yajati. This is the idea. This is the functioning spirit. This is the Upanishadic Upasana Khanda portion of the Veda that continues on into Bhakti. The idea that one must become a deva in order to worship the deva. One must become a god in order to worship God, because only gods can associate with God. Who do you think is going to associate with God? Well, we can say only the angels can associate with God. So if you want to associate with God, you have to become an angel. So formally speaking, diksha means that you say, all right, I want in, so I need to have the proper uniform, a spiritual body, both an internal spiritual body and an external spiritual body, because the gross body also has to be spiritualized. Actually, there's nothing outside of Krishna. So there's no question, this is not this body. You can't say this is a material body. You spiritualize the body. Spiritualize the mind. And that formally takes place at initiation time when you agree to take up the sadhana. Well, so he's talking about these 5 kinds of mukti. But what's interesting about it is that since they all are really a part, the devotee doesn't want those things for themselves. You want to be equal to Krishna so that not because that's the ticket to closeness. What the devotee wants, he wants to see Krishna always. He wants to behold Krishna. He wants to hear Krishna. He wants to hear the tinkle of his voice. Wants to hear the enchantment of his flute always, every minute, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and 366 days on a leap year. So now he's going to give an example. Now, this is what I wanted to talk about, because something I observe about this example and also something that comes up later. And well, I'm not exactly sure. Like I said, I've already forgotten what's happened in the earlier anuccheds. So I'm just catching up here and my memory is coming back to me. But I will definitely be staying one step ahead in order to do the class. Because I'm not doing it for anybody but myself. So you can come and join me on Zoom. And then afterwards, I will post to YouTube the recording. Right, so what he's going to do now is going to talk about, so he says, sāmīpyam apyudahritam bhagavat sandarbhe Kardama Niryana Varnanaya. So Kardama Muni, this is all in the story of Kardama Devahuti and Kapila Dev. So in the early chapters of that saga, you have the marriage of Kardama Muni at Brahma's request to the daughter of Manu, Devahuti. So Devahuti, she serves Kardama, who is a Muni, a great sage, and she does so selflessly, and she becomes emaciated. And she serves him so selflessly. This was described actually just in the earlier Parichet. In the earlier Parichet, a bit of that whole, the beginnings of that whole story were told. And it's already come up a couple of times actually already in Priti Sandarbha. So this is the concluding portion of that Kardama, because what happens, Kardama Muni, he goes and he enjoys in the celestial worlds, he has a honeymoon that lasts 60,000 years or whatever, when some fabulous number, and it's a real honeymoon. They go, it's just like, you used to see in the old movies there, they get on we're going to go for our honeymoon, we'll take a voyage around the world. So that's what Kardama and Devahuti did. They took a voyage around the universe. They went to Nandan Kanan, this is how much punya, this is just how much spiritual, merit this Kardama had stored up in his activities of tapasya. So he enjoyed like in a palace, in a floating palace that traveled through the universe like some great yacht. At any rate, the whole thing was that prior to that, Devahuti had served him without any reward from him whatsoever. He was so completely absorbed in his tapasya. Now, this is a real man thing, but this is also, a little bit of Stri Dharma here. So Devahuti, she was serving selflessly her husband, who was engaged in deep austerities in order to attain the supreme destination. So she considered it her, even though she was the daughter of a king, and she considered it her divine duty to serve her husband and to help him achieve his goal. And so at the end of that, what happens is that Kardama says, "You get," and he says, "I offer you everything, whatever I got from my tapasya, that you get a share of that." So now, and then after doing that, you see, he leaves home and becomes a sannyasi. And after that, he also attains full liberation. So that this is at the end of that section, so chapter 24. And so there's a series of 5-6 verses that Jiva Goswami is referring to. And it's kind of interesting, right? I'm always saying it's kind of interesting because there's always something interesting. That's if there wasn't something that kept one's interest, it would be difficult to continue slugging away. Anyway, Mano Brahmani Yunjana. So there he says Mano Brahmani Yunjana. So they're just quoting. He's just taking these words. So now he's referring to the story, but he's specifically referring now to these words. He's not just we'll go over the whole 5 verses together in a minute. But first of all, I'll just do this one to do this one segment, which says Mano Brahmani Yunjana. So he was preparing to die, so he fixed his mind on Brahman. All right. So now this is a big deal here, and we're still cleaning up. Babaji, Srila Jiva Goswami Paji. Just see how close I am. Sri Satyanarayan Das Babaji and Sri Jiva Goswami in my mind are intertwined. Anyway, so Sri Jiva Goswami, he wants to, he has to, do a little bit of cleaning. So one of the cleaning things is this Brahma, Paramatma, and Bhagavan iti shabdate, this verse from the Bhagavatam, which was really the guiding force for 2 of the Sandarbhas, namely Bhagavat and Paramatma Sandarbha. So that particular, so this is the, this Brahmeti, Paramatmeti, Bhagavaniti, the importance of the simultaneity of the experience, that the Bhagavan experience simultaneously includes any possibility of Paramatma's experience, or also this Brahman experience. So now if you say that Brahman experience is diametrically opposed to Bhagavan experience, well then that becomes a problem. Because you have to say this is achintya bheda bhed. So the abheda part also has to be experienced. Now that abheda part might be experienced in a flash, and it might very certainly become the, let's say, the prishta bhumi. It becomes the backdrop for everything else that happens. The backdrop of everything else that happens is the oneness between the devotee and Krishna. So the Brahma Jnana is integral to the Bhagavat Jnana. So it's one Advaya Tattva that is perceived as Brahman, or it's perceived as Bhagavan. And it's also perceived as Paramatma, but Paramatma is kind of an in-between spot, because Paramatma is also an expansion of Bhagavan. That's why we say Angsho Yasya Kaiswai Vibhavati Vashayan Eva Mayam Pumanscha. So the first thing that happens when Kardama Muni is going for his liberation, and it says Mano Brahmani Yunjana. He engaged his mind, Yunjana, engaging his mind in Brahman. Ityarabhya. Then Madhyecha, so that's at the beginning. Then Madhyecha, in the middle, Labdhatma Mukta Bandhana. So there it says Labdhatma. So he attained the Atma. So now we always say, right? We always say that Paramatma worship is the worship of the yogis, right? The goal of the yogis is Paramatma. Well, the goal of the yogis is Atma. But the Atma and the Paramatma, one who attains the Atma attains the Paramatma also. So figuratively or, without the symbolism, with just the pure knowledge, Paramatma Jnana. So here it says Labdhatma. So Atma Jnana and Brahma Jnana are somewhat different. Because in the Brahma Jnana you have no difference. In Atma Jnana you have difference, Atma, Paramatma. So the beginnings, the stirrings of relationship are there. In particular, relationships of Shanta and Dasya. So Labdhatma, Mukta Bandhana, completely liberated. Iti Uktva, so saying these two things, Sarvante, at the very end, Bhagavad Bhakti Yogena Prapto Bhagavatim Gatim. Iti Evam Ukta Ritya. All right, so now this Sāmīpya, he says here, has an Ukta Riti. An Ukta Riti means that there's a particular way of attaining Sāmīpya Mukti. A procedure that's involved. So the third thing, so after attaining Brahman, after attaining Atma, then the last thing is Sarvante, Bhagavad Bhakti Yogena, through Bhakti Yoga of Bhagavan, he attained Praptaha Bhagavatim Gatim. He attained the goal of the Bhagavatas. He attained the goal, Bhagavan's own abode. Sāmīpya, that's what it means, Bhagavatim Gatim. He's taking that as Sāmīpya. So he attained Sāmīpya after having attained these Brahma and Paramatma knowledge and experience. All right, so let's give it a look at the other. Let's have a look at what the translation said. Let me just here we go. Is that it? Okay, so here we see it. Sāmīpyam apyudahritam bhakti Bhagavat Sandarbhe Kardama Niryana Varnanaya Mano Brahmani Yunjanaha Ityarabhya Madhyecha Labdhatma Mukta Bandhanaha Ityuktva Sarvante Bhagavad Bhakti Yogena Prapto Bhagavatim Gatim. So this Riti, so he's saying, so what he's taking, he's from this one instance here, he's generalizing. And that generalization, he comes up and talks about it later on also. That Brahma experience, Brahma Gyan, is included within the experience of Bhagavad Bhakti. Actually, this has been more or less the subject from the last little bit. I'm sorry, I got a warning message. All right, so here's the translation. The mukti called Sāmīpya has also been discussed in Bhagavad Sandarbha in the description of Kardama's death, beginning with the verse, Kardama fixed his mind on the absolute. So this is already, I'm not happy with this. I look at this and I say, why didn't I change that? I didn't observe what was going on. So here it says Brahman. So it's important, not just he says absolute, but that he says Brahman, so that we know for sure what he's talking about. And then he attained his true self-identity. So that also free from all material bondage. This also I would like to make it more clear that he's talking about the Atma here. He was situated in his own Swarup, right? Swarupena vyavastiti. Tata Swarupe avasthanam. And finally, he attained the association of Bhagavan through devotion to him. Well, it's sāmīpya, so I would say the association says he attained proximity. You see, editing never finishes. You can always improve, at any rate. Babaji's commentary. So here are the verses. So after giving examples of Salokya and Sarupya, Jiva Goswami here gives an example of Sāmīpya, which means to live in proximity to Bhagavan, again referring to Kardama Muni. The complete description is as follows. Kardama fixed his mind on the absolute. So I'm just using the same what we used in the translation. Kardama fixed his mind on the absolute, which is beyond cause and effect, which is devoid of the gunas and yet illuminates them, and which is realized only by one-pointed devotional service. Bereft of ego, possessiveness, and all forms of dualism, and established in the vision of equanimity, Kardama witnessed his true self. Being inwardly centered, with his mind stabilized in unfluctuating peace, he became calm, like an ocean without waves. His mind fixed on Bhagavan Vasudeva, the omniscient, immanent self, through supreme devotion, Kardama attained his true self-identity, free from all material bondage. He saw that Bhagavan, situated as the self in all beings, and all beings existing in the supreme self that is Bhagavan, devoid of all hatred and desire, and being situated in the vision of equanimity towards all things. Kardama Muni attained the association of Bhagavan through devotion to him. So the verses in Sanskrit are as follows. I'll say them in Sanskrit. Mano Brahmani Yunjano Yat Tat Sad Asatah Param Gunavabhasi Viguna Eka Bhaktyānubhāvite. So this is a lot of descriptions of Brahman. Mano Brahmani Yunjano, fixing the mind on Brahman, which is beyond cause and effect, beyond black and white, beyond negativity and positivity. All duality, beyond all dualities. Right? So Mano Brahmani Yunjano Yat Tat Sadasatah Param Gunava Bhase Viguna Eka Bhaktyānubhāvite. So he appears, what is that? Gunava Bhase. He illuminates, he is devoid of the gunas and yet illuminates them. Eka Bhaktyānubhāvite, and who is meditated on through single-pointed devotion. So there, even Brahman, right? The experience of Brahman is there. But that experience of Brahman comes through devotion. What does that mean, devotion? Abhyasa. When we talk about abhyasa in yoga, right? Stito, tatra stito yatnaha abhyasa. So abhyasa means to go back again. Yato yato manas chalati manas chanchalamasstiram tatastato niyamyaitad atmanyeva vashangnayet. So wherever the mind goes, you stop it and you bring it back under the control of the self. So that's abhyasa. But abhyasa means bhakti. Even if it's at some level is going to mean bhakti, guru bhakti. Everyone will say guru bhakti, Bhagavad bhakti. Without it, even Brahman is not attainable. The Supreme Absolute is not even attainable without bhakti in some form, some devotion, some commitment, some surrender. So the next one, nirahang. So these are kind of merge into one another. Nevertheless, Jiva Goswami has seen a hierarchy of events here. So nirahang kritir, nirmamascha, nirdvandvaha, samadrik, swadrik, pratyak prashanta dhir, dhiraha, prashantormir ivodadhi. So these are all the qualities that he had attained through his practice of meditation on Brahman. Nirahankriti, he had no ego. Nirmamaha, he had no attachments. Nirdvandva, he was free of all dualities. Samadrik, he was equanimous. He saw all beings equally. He had no favorites. Swadrik, he saw himself. He could see himself. He knew himself. Pratyak prashanta dhir, his intelligence was peaceful and direct. He was dhira, wise and peaceful and patient. Prashantormi, he was the waves. He was like an ocean in which the waves are still. Vasudeve Bhagavati Sarvagye Pratyagatmani Parena Bhakti Bhavena Labdhatma Bhukta Bandhanaha. So here you can see how we creep up, right? This Paramatma. And so far, I didn't mention anything about the Paramatma being Vasudeva or Bhagavan. So here he says Vasudeve Bhagavati Sarvagye Pratyagatmani. So now we're getting a little bit more about the Paramatma, right? He is the Pratyagatma. So Pratyagatma means the self of the self. That's how we would explain it as Vaishnavas. The Pratyagatmani, the direct self, right? You look inward, Pratyag, what you have Pratyaksha, that direct experience of the self. So that Atma that you have direct experience of, that is the Pratyagatma. So that Pratyagatma is Bhagavan Vasudeva. So Parena Bhakti Bhavena Labdhatma Mukti Vandana. So here again, by supreme devotional activity, he attained the self and became free of all bondage. So these chapters, Kardama Muni and Kapila, it's about yoga, Sankhya and yoga. I think I explained this the other day. So, Atmanam sarvabhuteshu bhagavantam avastitam apashyat sarvabhutani bhagavatyapi chatmani. So now here we have classical Upanishadic Tattva language. This is so universal. It's in the Bhagavad Gita. It's in the Isha Upanishad. That sarva bhuteshu, sarva bhutani chatmani. Sarvabhuteshu chatmanam sarvabhutani chatmani. Seeing the self in the self, seeing the self in all beings, seeing all beings in the self. This is the goal, right? This is the goal, universal goal. So this is also the universal goal for the bhaktas, or this is at least, let's say, the harmonious understanding, because in the 11th canto also, then when it talks about the Uttama Bhagavata, it also talks in terms like these. And elsewhere also in the Bhagavatam, it talks in terms like these. So every time when he's talking about attaining the Supreme, what is that like? Right? So here he says, he comes up with a classical expression. He says, okay, you heard this before, folks, but here it is again. Atmanam sarvabhuteshu bhagavantam avastitam apashyat sarvabhutani bhagavatyapi chatmani. So these words, Bhagavan, Atman, and Sarvabhuta, finding all these words in the same verse, not such a difficult thing to achieve. Right? So Atmanam Sarvabhuteshu Bhagavantam Avastitam Apashyat. So he saw, Apashyat, Lang Lakar. He saw Bhagavantam, Atmanam. He saw Atmanam first, that's what he says first. So Atmanam Sarvabhuteshu Apashyat. Atmanam Sarvabhuteshu Bhagavantam Avastitam. So he saw the self as Bhagavan situated in all beings. Of course, this word Atma, we can interpret it in various ways, but here he says he saw himself in Bhagavan's presence in all beings. Right? To see yourself in all beings, or to see Bhagavan in all beings, what's the difference? So Atmanam Sarvabhuteshu Bhagavantam Avastitam Apashyat Sarvabhutani. He saw all living beings, Bhagavati, in Bhagavan, Api Chatmani, and in the self. So then the last verse in the series. Oops, sorry. It's here. Ichhadvesha vihinena sarvatra samachetasa bhagavad bhakti yogena prapta bhagavati gatihi. So free from desire and hatred, equal in mind towards all things, he, through the practice of devotional yoga to the Lord, he attained the proximity to the Lord. He attained the Lord's abode. Okay, there, we got through it. So now think, folks, this is what we're... All right, let's just finish this. So in these 5 verses, the verse 324-43 describes the experience of Brahman. Verse 324, 46, 47, that of Paramatma. And the last verse, that of Bhagavan. From this sequence, the superiority of Bhagavat Sakshatkara is clearly implied. The first 4 verses describe Kardama's internal experience, but the last speaks about his attaining the abode of Bhagavan, which means that he also attained Bhagavan's association. This can also be understood from the fact that he was the father of Kapila, an incarnation of Bhagavan. Therefore, he must have sāmīpya with him in Vaikuntha. So he's already got a ticket to sāmīpya. He doesn't need to have any, go through any special sadhana. So the last thing was about his attaining his external attainment. So the attainment of God's abode is looked upon as an external attainment. But we believe, this is a very important thing. This is so important, because the whole Indian system gets you thinking like a Mayavadi anyway. So how to have the world be real and at the same time to be a place of illusion? How do you do that? You know this world is temporary and unreal, and therefore as illusory as a wisp of smoke. Vanity, vanity, all is vanity. Yes, this is all vanity. What is it going to rest? It's like that famous poem of Ozymandias. You know, here lies Ozymandias, you know, the ruler of the universe. And who remembers him now? His gravestone is buried in sand. So, for us, for devotees, we believe in the reality of the world. We believe in the reality of the senses. We believe in the reality of sensory experience. We believe in the reality of relationships. We believe in the reality of love. Only what we understand is that when you love, you're loving God. When you're interacting with the world, you're interacting with God in some way or another. So sometimes you may have to fight with God, because God likes to play around, you know, like he did with the Jaya and Vijaya. So it depends. You know, it depends on you, it depends on him, what kind of relationship you have. But a relationship in knowledge and love is the best kind of relationship. So you think that you're going to love God in an afterworld without having learned to love God in his direct presence in the world, well, then you're a little bit fooling yourself, because you haven't done the sadhana. The sadhana of love is love. So if you don't love, then how are you going to attain the goal of love? You have to practice. So at any rate here, so let's just go on. So these first four, so the idea here was that he had all three of those experiences at once. But the final experience was actually attaining the association, the direct association of the object of his love, the Supreme Lord, in his abode. So I'm saying that we think in concrete terms. It is actually even if we didn't believe in the ultimate reality of these personalities, and we took it all as a big fantasy and just entered into it as a fantasy. Through concentration, through devotion, through commitment, one finds the absolute truth lying there within it. There are truths to be found everywhere. They're found by devotion, by commitment. All right. So we have a sāmīpya. So the point, what is the point that we're getting so far? Sāmīpya, sārupya. We're not against those things. We have to understand what's going on with them. But here, this was something new. This was something that was a little extra. The idea of going through Brahma Gyan, through Paramatma Gyan, and then to Bhagavat Gyan. This was another way of looking at mukti. And so this is going to come up later on also. Bhakti is automatically mukti. But of course, it's always better if you perceive it. But you can live something without really knowing what it is that you're living. That's more or less the situation of the gopis. Okay, so now here we go to Sayujya. All right, so everybody knows Sayujya. You don't want Sayujya. The devotee doesn't take Sayujya. So what's going on? So Ata Sayujyam Aghasuradi Drishtantena Sadhakanam Api Gamyam. Right, so I'm not really quite sure what he wants to say here. He's saying, so Atha, by saying Atha, that means he's starting a new subject. So Sayujya is a bit of a different subject now, really, because Sayujya, we know that's problematic for devotees. So he says here, Sayujyam Aghasuradi Drishtantena Sadhakanam Api Gamyam. So by the example that was given of Aghasura. So Aghasura, when Krishna came out of Aghasura's mouth, Aghasura had already died and his soul was hanging in the sky and it just entered into Krishna's effulgence. So something like that, entering into Krishna's effulgence or entering into Krishna's being. So it happens like that. So sadhakanam api gamyam. So I'm not quite sure whether he means that that we should apply that to the sadhakas, or that is the way that the sadhakas can understand it. But at any rate, it goes on. I would say that this should be understood. It happens to sadhakas like that also. The sadhakas of that kind of liberation. Right? So someone who wants Sayujya, then it will happen like this. We can assume that it happens like that. This is not talking about sadhakas of devotion here. This is talking about the sadhakas who are desiring Sayujya. So Ata Sayujyam Agasuradi Drishtantena Sadhakanam Apigamyam Salokyadivat Swabi Mata Twabhavat Spashto Daharanam Srimata Bhagavatena Nakritam Iti. Okay, so what is that? This Iti is telling us why, right? Because there is no desire for devotees to have Sayujya. Devotees don't want Sayujya. They might desire Salokya. Salokyadi, but so Salokyadi means Salokya, the Chatur, 4 kinds of mukti. So these, like those, Swabi Mata Twa Abhavat. So no devotee has the desire for Sayujya in the way that they may have the desire for Salokya, Sarsti Sāmīpya. So it says, because of that, Spashto Daharanam Srimata Bhagavate Nakritam. So there's no examples given in the Bhagavatam of anybody performing a sadhana and then merging into Bhagavan. No examples. Show me one example. I don't think there's any examples. We do often hear stories about do we have any stories of a devotee merging into? I don't think we do. I think we should take Jiva Goswami on his word, but I cannot think of one. So here he says, Sayujya Mukti is comprehensible even to practitioners. See, that's wrong. So I'm going to have to go back and take note of these things because I think that these are, that I should correct if I see that there's a mistake. Because when you're going through it the first time, it's trees, 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 and you don't see the forest. So Sayujya Mukti is comprehensible. It should be understood as attained by practitioners of that goal through the example of Aghasura and others. So the way that Aghasura's soul merged into Bhagavan, that's the way it would happen for a person who's a sadhaka of that. So unlike Salokya and other muktis, Sayujya is not recommended by Srimad Bhagavatam. Therefore, it does not give any explicit examples of a practitioner attempting to achieve or achieving Sayujya. All right, I think we have time for one more. So, Asya Bhagavat Lakshanananda Nimagnata Sfurtireva Pradhanam Kvachid Ichhaya Tad Anugrahena Tadiya Tat Shakti Lesha Praptyaiva Yatha Yuktam Bahis Tad Datta Prakrita Tad Bhogo Chishta Lesha Mevanu Bhavati Ityeke Tatracha Natutameva Sarvam Eva Chanubhavati Iti Abhupagamyam Sarvatha Tat Praptir An Abhupagamatuat Jagad Vyaparadi Nishedhena. All right, so this is a biggie. So, so this is what is the characteristic of this experience of Brahman? This Sayujya, what is it? What is this Sayujya Mukti all about? So he says, Bhagavat Lakshanananda Nimagnata Sfurtireva. So Sfurti here would mean like a realization, or the actual direct experience of that thing. Right? So what is it? Nimagnata, of being completely immersed in Ananda, in the Ananda that is Bhagavat Lakshana Ananda. So the joy of being him, you get to experience that. What is the joy of being him? So we're talking about Bhagavat Sayujya Mukti, not Brahma Sayujya Mukti. So that's the principal aspect of this liberation. Kvachid Ichhaya Tad Anugrahena Tadiya Tad Shakti Lesha Praptyaiva Yatha Yuktam Bahis Tad Datta Prakrita Tad Bhogo Chishta Lesham Evanubhavati Iti Eke. So now this is an opinion of somebody, so I'm not exactly sure. He doesn't go on about that, but he's saying that sometimes, if he so desires, and if God so agrees, by his mercy, one gets a fragment of his potency that is given to him by Krishna, and then in an appropriate manner, he is allowed to externally experience some aspect or some power or something of Krishna's that is a remnant or a leftover of something that he himself has done. In other words, it's being experienced as prasad, that Krishna allows a devotee to experience some aspect of his being, of his power, for this, so that he can experience that. So that is Sayujya, also called Sayujya Mukti. So I don't know where he gets that definition, but anyway, Tatra Cha Natu, but even there, in that, if we accept that definition, then he doesn't get to do everything. It's limited. The powers that he's given are very much limited. And we should understand that, because it is impossible for a jiva to so attain. And that is stated in the Brahma Sutras, Jagad Vyapara Varjam. So we have to make that clear. All right, so intuitive feeling of absorption in bliss, like that of Bhagavan, is the predominant feature of Sayujya. Some people hold that by willing it, and only after acquiring a little of Bhagavan's power through his grace, a Sayujya Mukta occasionally, externally experiences a fraction of the remnants of his pleasure, which is transcendental and bestowed by him appropriately according to qualification. Intuitive feeling of absorption in bliss, like that of Bhagavan, is the predominant feature of Sayujya. Some people hold that by willing it, and only after acquiring a little of Bhagavan's power through his grace, the Sayujya Mukta occasionally, externally, experiences a fraction of the remnants of his pleasure, which is transcendental and bestowed by him appropriately according to the devotee's qualification. Very interesting stuff, and we will continue to think about it. And now we shall do the kirtan at the end of class as advertised. So I don't mind, everybody can turn their computers off, but I'm going to sing. Jai Jai Radhe Krishna Govinda, Jai Jai Radhe Krishna Govinda, Radhe Govinda, Radhe Govinda, Radhe Govinda, Radhe Govinda, Radhe Govinda, Radhe Govinda. Jai Jai Radhe Krishna Govinda, Jai Jai Radhe Krishna Govinda, Jai Jai Shyam Sundar Madan Mohan Vrindavana Chandra, Jai Jai Radha Raman, Ras Bihari, Shri Gokulananda, Jai Jai Radha Kanta, Radha Vinod, Shri Radha Govinda, Jai Jai Raseshwari Vinodini, Bhanu Kula Chandra, Jai Jai Lalita Vishakha Adi, Jata Sakhi Vrinda, Jai Jai Sri Rupa Manjari Adi, Manjari Ananga, Jai Jai Purnamasi Kundalata, Jaya Viravinda Tomra Kripa Kori Deo He Jugal Charana Ravinda, Kripa Kori Deo He Jugal Charanaravinda deho jugal, 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 Charanaravinda. Jai Radhe Krishna Govinda, Jai Jai Radhe Krishna Govinda, Radhe Govinda, Radhe Govinda, Radhe Govinda, Radhe Govinda, Radhe Govinda, Jai Jai Radhe Krishna Govinda, Jai Jai Radhe Krishna Govinda. Jai Jai Shri Shri Guru Ki Jai. Jai Jai Sri Jiva Goswami Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Jai Shri Goswami Prabhu Ki Jai. Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Sivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Jai Jai Sri Radha Kunda Shyama Kunda Giri Govardhana Ki Jai. Jai Jai Sri Gandharvika Giridhari Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Jai Jai Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai. Nitai Go Premanande Hari Hari.